In 1867 Montana Territory, Elena Vasquez dangles by her hair from a cottonwood tree, the townspeople's accusations of witchcraft weighing heavier than the rope that suspends her above the ground. When a mysterious lumberjack emerges from the wilderness demanding her release, he saves more than just her life. But can two outcasts survive when an entire territory has already passed judgment on their souls? Blood dripped from Elena's scalp onto the dry leaves below as the rope twisted her higher into the cottonwood tree. The men of Willowbrook had dragged her from her small cabin before dawn, their torches casting dancing shadows across their angry faces. Now, the autumn sun of 1867 climbed over the Montana Territory mountains, painting everything in shades of gold that mocked the darkness in their hearts. "Witch!" Mayor Caldwell's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. His fat fingers pointed at Elena as she swayed helplessly above the crowd. "You brought death to our children with your devil's magic." Elena tried to speak, but the weight pulling on her hair sent lightning bolts of pain through her skull. Her grandmother's silver cross, the only thing left from her family, pressed against her chest as she struggled to breathe. Around her feet, the townspeople pressed closer, their faces twisted with grief and rage. Mrs. Henderson clutched a small wooden doll to her chest, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "My Lucy was healthy until she drank your tea," she sobbed. 3 days later, the fever took her. The crowd murmured their agreement like wolves growling before a hunt. Elena's vision blurred as more blood trickled into her eyes, but she could still see the children hiding behind their mother's skirts. The ones who had lived through the sickness that swept through Willowbrook like wildfire. Their wide eyes stared at her with a mixture of fear and confusion. "I only tried to help," Elena whispered, but her words were lost in the wind. She had arrived in Willowbrook 2 months ago, her horse lame and her supplies nearly gone. The territorial map had shown this settlement as nothing more than a dot beside a stream, but she had hoped to find work, maybe even a place to belong. Instead, she found suspicion and whispers that followed her wherever she went. The fever started 3 weeks after her arrival. First, little Lucy Henderson complained of feeling hot. Then Billy Murphy began shaking with chills. One by one, the children fell sick with a burning heat that no amount of cool water could cure. Elena had offered to help, sharing the healing knowledge her grandmother had taught her in the mountains of New Mexico. But children kept dying. "String her up proper," shouted Tom Bradley the blacksmith. His massive arms were crossed over his leather apron, and his eyes burned with the same fire as his forge. "Let her dance with the devil she serves." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. The rope creaked ominously above her head, and she wondered if the branch would hold or if she would fall to her death in the dirt below. Either way, she realized with growing terror, these people meant to see her dead before the sun reached its peak. Mayor Caldwell raised his hand for silence, and the crowd grew still as a graveyard. In the distance, Elena could hear something that didn't belong, the steady rhythm of an axe biting into wood. Thunk, 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 like a heartbeat in the forest. "Elena Vasquez," Caldwell announced in his most official voice, "you stand accused of practicing witchcraft and causing the deaths of innocents. How do you answer these charges?" The rope spun slowly, giving Elena a view of the entire crowd. She saw fear in their faces, but also something else: guilt. These people needed someone to blame for their loss, someone to carry the weight of their grief. She was different, foreign, alone, perfect for their purposes. "I am innocent," she managed to say, her voice stronger than she felt. "I tried to save your children, not harm them." "Lies!" Mrs. Patterson from the general store stepped forward, her finger jabbing toward Elena like a weapon. "I saw you gathering strange plants by the creek, talking to yourself in that foreign tongue." "Spanish," Elena corrected weakly. "I was praying in Spanish." But the crowd didn't want to hear explanations. They wanted blood. They wanted someone to pay for the empty beds and silent houses that the fever had left behind. The sound of chopping wood grew louder, closer, but Elena barely noticed. Her world had narrowed to the burning in her scalp, and the faces below that looked at her with such hatred. A child started crying somewhere in the crowd, one of the survivors, frightened by the grown-up's anger. The sound cut through Elena's pain like a knife. These people she had tried to heal now wanted her dead. The irony tasted as bitter as the blood in her mouth. "Please," she whispered, though she knew mercy was as scarce as water in a drought. "I never meant harm to anyone." The axe sound stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in the clearing. Even the crowd seemed to notice the change, their heads turning toward the forest edge. Elena found herself holding her breath, waiting for whatever came next in this nightmare that had become her life. Something was coming through the trees. "Cut her down, now." The voice boomed across the clearing like thunder rolling down from the mountains. A giant of a man stepped from the shadows of the pine trees, and Elena's pain-blurred vision focused on him with desperate hope. He stood taller than any man she had ever seen, with shoulders broad enough to carry a fallen tree. His red flannel shirt was soaked with sweat, and wood chips clung to his dark beard like snow. In his massive hands, he carried a double-headed axe that gleamed in the morning sunlight. The crowd turned as one, their bloodthirsty attention shifting to this unexpected newcomer. Mayor Caldwell's face went pale, but he tried to maintain his authority. "This is town business, Jameson. You got no right to interfere." Marcus Jameson. Elena had heard whispers about the hermit lumberjack who lived alone in the deep woods. Some said he was crazy. Others claimed he was dangerous. But as his steel-gray eyes met hers across the clearing, she saw neither madness nor violence, only a quiet strength that made her heart skip. "Any business that involves hurting a woman becomes my business," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of an avalanche. He set his axe down with careful precision, but kept his hand near the handle. "I won't ask again." Tom Bradley, the blacksmith, stepped forward, his chest puffed out with false courage. "You can't tell us what to do in our own town, tree cutter. This witch killed our children." "Did she?" Marcus asked, his gaze never leaving Caldwell's face. "Were you there when they died? Did you see her cast spells or mix poisons?" The mayor's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Well, no, but—" "Then you got nothing but fear and grief talking." Marcus's voice grew softer, more dangerous. "And that ain't enough to hang a woman." Elena felt the rope above her head shift and creak. Someone she couldn't see who was climbing the tree. Panic shot through her as she imagined them tightening the noose. But then she felt the pressure on her hair lessen slightly. Whoever was up there was cutting her bonds, not tightening them. "She's a Mexican," Mrs. Patterson called out, as if that explained everything. "They practice dark magic down south. Everyone knows that." Marcus turned his cold stare on the shopwoman, and she took an involuntary step backward. "My grandmother was Mexican," he said quietly. "Taught me to read and write and treat folks with respect. You saying she was evil too?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a campfire. Elena had never heard that Marcus Jameson had Mexican blood, but the way he said it, proud and defiant, made something warm bloom in her chest despite her terror. The rope around her hair went slack all at once, and Elena crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs and torn fabric. Her legs wouldn't hold her weight, and she crumpled onto the carpet of fallen leaves, gasping for breath. Through the curtain of her hair, she watched Marcus stride toward her with surprisingly gentle steps for such a large man. "You're safe now," he said, kneeling beside her despite the crowd of angry townspeople surrounding them. His voice was rough as tree bark but warm as a campfire. "I've got you." The words wrapped around Elena like a blanket after a cold night. She tried to sit up, but her head spun with pain and relief. Marcus reached out as if to help her, then stopped, his hands hovering in the air, asking permission without words. Elena nodded, and he slipped one massive arm under her shoulders, lifting her as easily as he might pick up a fallen branch. She leaned against his solid chest, breathing in the scent of pine sap and honest sweat that clung to his clothes. "This ain't over, Jameson." Mayor Caldwell's voice shook with rage and embarrassment. "The territorial law will hear about this, about both of you." Marcus stood slowly, keeping Elena steady against his side. "Let them hear," he said. "But they'll hear the truth, not your lies." The crowd began to mutter and shift, their bloodlust cooling in the face of Marcus's calm determination. Some of the women pulled their children closer, whispering warnings about the strange man from the woods and his Mexican witch. But others looked uncertain now, as if they were waking up from a bad dream and wondering what they had almost done. Elena's vision cleared enough to see the faces around her, some still twisted with hatred, others beginning to show doubt or shame. Mrs. Henderson clutched her daughter's doll tighter, tears still streaming down her cheeks. Tom Bradley fingered his hammer, but made no move to use it. "Can you walk?" Marcus asked Elena quietly, His voice pitched for her ears alone. She tested her weight on shaking legs and found they would hold her barely. I think so. Good. We're leaving. He picked up his axe in one smooth motion, the blade catching the light like a promise. Anyone who wants to stop us is welcome to try. Nobody moved. The crowd parted like water before them as Marcus guided Elena toward the forest edge, his hand steady on her arm. With each step away from the cottonwood tree, Elena felt the crushing weight of their judgment lift from her shoulders. But as they reached the tree line, Mayor Caldwell's voice followed them like a curse. "This ain't finished, witch. We know where to find you." Elena shivered despite the warmth of the morning sun, knowing that her troubles were far from over. But for the first time in weeks, she wasn't facing them alone. Steam rose from the basin of warm water as Elena dipped her torn fingers into its healing warmth. Marcus had prepared everything before she even asked: clean rags, soap that smelled like lavender, and a small mirror that reflected her battered face with brutal honesty. His cabin felt like stepping into another world, far from the hatred that had nearly killed her. The single room stretched before her like a sanctuary built from logs and dreams. Books lined one wall, more books than she had seen since leaving her father's house in New Mexico. A massive stone fireplace dominated the far end, its flames casting dancing shadows across furniture that Marcus had clearly made with his own skilled hands. Everything fit together like pieces of a perfect puzzle. "You read all these?" Elena asked, her voice still hoarse from screaming. Marcus set a steaming cup of coffee beside her, the rich smell filling her nose with comfort. Long winters give a man plenty of time for learning. He settled into a chair that groaned under his weight, but his gray eyes remained gentle. "Books don't judge you for what you look like or where you come from." The comment hit closer to home than Elena expected. She had grown up in a house full of books, her father teaching her to read in both Spanish and English before she was 6 years old. But those days felt like a lifetime ago. Before the mine accident, before the debts, before she had to run north with nothing but her horse and her grandmother's healing knowledge. "They think I killed their children," she said, testing the words aloud in this safe space. "Did you?" The question came without judgment, as simple as asking about the weather. Elena met his steady gaze, seeing neither accusation nor pity there. "I tried to save them. My grandmother taught me about plants that can break fevers, herbs that ease pain, but some sicknesses." She shook her head, remembering the helpless feeling as child after child slipped away despite her efforts. "Some things are stronger than any medicine." Marcus nodded slowly, his massive hands wrapped around his own coffee cup. "My grandmother used to say that healing and dying both happen in God's time, not ours. A healer can only do their best and trust the rest to heaven." "Your grandmother was Mexican?" Elena had heard him mention it to the crowd, but the idea still surprised her. Marcus looked like any other mountain man, beard rough as pine bark, skin weathered by sun and wind, hands scarred from years of hard work. "Maria Santos came north with my grandfather when California still belonged to Mexico. She spoke 4 languages and could cure anything from snakebite to heartbreak." A smile softened his stern features. "Died when I was 12, but not before she taught me that a person's worth isn't measured by their skin color or the language they speak." Elena felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. Here was someone who understood what it meant to be caught between two worlds, to carry the blood of people others feared or despised. She sipped her coffee, letting its warmth spread through her body as she studied this unexpected ally. The cabin told stories about its owner that words couldn't capture. Tools hung in perfect order along one wall, saws and chisels and draw knives that gleamed with careful maintenance. A half-finished wooden chair sat near the window, its smooth curve showing the artist hidden inside the lumberjack. Even the way he stacked his firewood spoke of a mind that found peace in creating order from chaos. "You could have left when the sickness started," Marcus observed. "Run before they turned on you." "Where would I go?" The question came out sharper than Elena intended. A Mexican woman alone in this territory? Most towns would drive me out before I could even explain myself. The wilderness might be kinder than people. She walked to the window, looking out at the forest that surrounded this refuge. Trees stretched in all directions, their golden leaves glowing like coins in the afternoon sun. Somewhere beyond those peaks lay the silver mine that had once belonged to her family, the mine that had killed her father and driven her into exile. Captain Rodriguez claimed it belonged to the territory now, But Elena still carried the original deed in her saddlebags, stained with her father's blood. "This is beautiful country," she said softly, "but it doesn't feel like home." "Home isn't a place," Marcus replied. "It's where people accept you for who you are, not what they think you should be." The words hung between them like bridge planks spanning a deep canyon. Elena turned from the window to find Marcus watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Interest, maybe, or understanding. Something that made her heart beat faster despite everything she had endured. A sound outside made them both freeze. Horses, at least 3, moving slow and careful through the forest. Elena's hand flew to her throat, remembering the rope that had held her just hours ago. Marcus rose silently, moving to the wall where his rifle hung loaded and ready. He peered through a gap in the logs, his body tense as a drawn bowstring. "Stay back from the windows," he whispered. Elena pressed herself against the wall beside the fireplace, her mind racing. Had the townspeople followed them? Were they coming to finish what they started? She thought of the hatred in their faces, the way they had looked at her like she was some wild animal that needed destroying. The horses stopped outside the cabin. Elena could hear voices now, low and urgent. Men talking about searching and finding and justice. Her blood turned to ice water in her veins. "Marcus Jameson!" The voice that called out was different from any she had heard in town. Deeper, more educated, carrying the authority of law. "I know you're in there. Come out so we can talk like civilized men." Marcus kept his rifle ready but didn't point it at the door. "Depends on what you want to talk about. About the woman you're harboring. About murder and witchcraft and territorial justice." Elena's legs nearly gave out beneath her. These weren't just angry townspeople. This was something bigger, more dangerous. She pressed her back against the stone fireplace, feeling the heat from the flames but finding no comfort in their warmth. Marcus glanced back at her, and she saw her own fear reflected in his eyes. But underneath the concern, she also saw determination, the same steel that had faced down an entire mob to save her life. "The woman is under my protection," Marcus called out. "She's committed no crimes that I can see." Laughter echoed from outside, cold as winter wind. "That's not for you to decide, Lumberjack. Open this door, or we'll open it for you." Elena closed her eyes, wondering if this was how her story would end, in flames and violence in a cabin that had offered her the first kindness she'd known in months. But when she opened them again, Marcus was looking at her with a question in his gaze. "Trust me," his eyes seemed to say. Elena nodded, not knowing what else to do. Outside, the voices grew more impatient, and she heard the unmistakable sound of weapons being readied for use. Whatever came next, she would face it standing beside the man who had already risked everything to save her once. "You have 30 seconds to surrender the witch, Jameson, or we burn you out." The voice outside cracked like a whip, and Elena recognized the speaker, now Captain Rodriguez, her father's former partner, and the man who had been trying to steal their family mine for years. Marcus looked at Elena with surprise, and something that might have been understanding. "You know who that is?" "My father's business partner," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "He wants more than just me. He wants what my family owned." Through the small window, Elena could see 3 horses and their riders. Rodriguez sat tall in his saddle, his territorial badge glinting in the afternoon sun like a silver star. His 2 companions looked like hired guns, men with cold eyes and easy hands on their weapons. This wasn't about justice or witchcraft. This was about greed, dressed up in legal clothes. "The silver mine," Marcus guessed. Putting pieces together with a quick mind, Elena was beginning to recognize behind his quiet manner. "My father found the richest vein in the territory before he died. Rodriguez has been trying to claim it ever since, saying the original deed was illegal because we're Mexican." Elena's hands clenched into fists. "But I still have the papers. Legal papers that prove it belongs to my family." Marcus nodded grimly. "And if you're convicted of witchcraft and murder, the mine goes to territorial holdings, which means it goes to his friends in the capital." 20 seconds, Jameson." Elena moved to Marcus's side, looking out at the men who wanted her dead or disappeared. Rodriguez had aged since she'd last seen him, his hair whiter, his face more lined with the weight of his schemes, but his eyes held the same hungry gleam that had frightened her even as a child. "There's a back way out," Marcus said quietly. "Through the root cellar. You could be deep in the forest before they know you're gone." and leave you to face them alone? Elena shook her head. They'll kill you for helping me. Maybe. But you'll be alive to tell the truth someday. Elena studied his profile as he watched their enemies. The courage in his steady hands, the protective set of his shoulders. This man had already given up his peaceful life to save her. She wouldn't let him sacrifice more. No, she said firmly. We face this together. 10 seconds. Marcus looked at her with something like admiration. You got a plan? Elena's mind raced through possibilities. Rodriguez wanted her alive long enough to sign away her rights to the mine. Dead women couldn't transfer property legally. That gave them some advantage, but not much. Let them in, she said, but keep your rifle close. Marcus stared at her, as if she'd suggested jumping off a cliff. Elena, trust me. She smoothed her torn dress and tried to look less like a woman who had been hanging from a tree hours ago. I know Rodriguez better than he knows himself. The sound of boots on wooden steps echoed through the cabin. Marcus reluctantly set his rifle aside but kept it within easy reach. Elena positioned herself near the table where the deed to the mine lay hidden in her saddlebags. If Rodriguez wanted to play legal games, she would give him more law than he bargained for. The door burst open without ceremony, and Captain Rodriguez strode in like he owned the place. His uniform was perfectly pressed despite the long ride, and his silver badge caught the firelight as he surveyed the cabin with calculating eyes. Elena Vasquez, he said with false warmth. You look well for a woman who was about to hang this morning. Captain Rodriguez. Elena kept her voice level, formal. Still stealing land from families who can't fight back. Rodriguez smiled, but the expression held no humor. Careful, señorita. You're wanted for serious crimes. Murder, witchcraft, corrupting the innocent. Very serious charges in territorial court. Charges you invented. Elena stepped forward, ignoring the way Rodriguez's men shifted their hands toward their guns. Tell me, Captain, did you start those rumors before or after you realized I still held the deed to my father's mine? The captain's smile faltered slightly. Behind him, his two companions exchanged glances. Clearly, they hadn't been told about the silver mine that made Elena valuable alive rather than dead. I don't know what you're talking about, Rodriguez said smoothly. I'm here to arrest a dangerous criminal and return her to face justice. Justice? Elena laughed, surprising herself with a bitter sound. Is that what you call hanging innocent women? Or is justice what you called it when you had my father's support beams weakened so the mine would collapse on him? The accusation hit home like an arrow finding its target. Rodriguez's face went pale, then flushed with anger. His hand dropped to his pistol grip, but Marcus stepped forward, his massive presence filling the small cabin. Careful, Captain, Marcus said quietly. That's a serious charge she's making. Maybe we should discuss this like civilized men. Stay out of this, Lumberjack, Rodriguez snarled. This is territorial business. But Elena pressed her advantage, pulling the leather saddlebags from beneath the table. Then, let's make it official. She withdrew a folded document, yellowed with age but still bearing official seals. The original deed to the Vasquez silver mine, signed by the territorial governor himself in 1861. Rodriguez's eyes fixed on the paper like a hawk spotting prey. That document is meaningless. Your father was killed in an accident. An accident you caused. Elena's voice grew stronger with each word. I have witnesses, Captain. Men who worked in that mine, who saw you paying bribes to have safety supports removed. Men who are still alive and willing to testify. The lie came easily, but it had the desired effect. Rodriguez's confident manner cracked like ice under pressure. His companions shifted nervously, beginning to understand that their captain had brought them into something more complicated than a simple arrest. You're bluffing, Rodriguez said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. Am I? Elena stepped closer, the deed held between them like a weapon. Test me. Take me to territorial court and see what happens when the truth comes out. See how many of your friends in the capital want to be connected to murder and theft. Marcus watched this verbal duel with growing admiration. Elena wasn't just defending herself, she was taking control, turning the tables on her accusers with nothing but courage and quick thinking. Rodriguez's hand tightened on his pistol. Maybe there won't be a trial. Maybe you'll resist arrest and get shot trying to escape. Maybe, Elena agreed calmly. But then you'll never get your hands on my mine, will you? Dead women don't sign property transfers. The standoff stretched like a taut rope about to snap. Rodriguez glared at Elena, while his men looked increasingly uncomfortable with their captain's obvious corruption. Marcus remained ready to move, his rifle close enough to grab if violence erupted. Finally, Rodriguez stepped back, his face twisted with frustrated rage. "This isn't over, witch. I'll find another way to make you pay for what you've done." "I'm sure you will," Elena replied. "But next time, bring better lies." Rodriguez turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Enjoy your victory, señorita. It won't last long." He looked at Marcus with cold hatred. "And you, lumberjack helping criminals, makes you a criminal too, remember that." The captain and his men left as suddenly as they had arrived, their horses' hoofbeats fading into the forest silence. Elena stood frozen until the sound completely disappeared, then sank into a chair as her legs finally gave out. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen," Marcus said softly. Elena looked up at him, seeing something new in his expression, respect mixed with wonder, and something deeper that made her heart skip. "It was the most terrifying thing I've ever done. But you did it anyway. I had to." She folded the deed carefully, her hands shaking slightly now that the danger had passed. Running away never solved anything. Sometimes you have to stand and fight, even when you're scared. Marcus nodded, understanding passing between them like warmth from the fire. Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Elena realized that, for the first time since her father's death, she had won a battle against the forces trying to destroy her. But as she looked at Marcus, this good man who had risked everything to help her, she knew the war was far from over. Rodriguez would be back, and next time, he would be ready for her tricks. Fire crackled in the darkness outside Marcus's cabin as Elena watched through the window, counting at least 12 torches moving between the trees like angry fireflies. The townspeople had returned, but this time they brought more than rope and accusations. They brought fear that burned hotter than their flames. "They're surrounding us," Marcus said grimly, checking his rifle for the third time in 5 minutes. His usually calm voice carried an edge Elena had never heard before, sharp as the blade of his axe. Elena pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, feeling the October night chill seep through the cabin walls. 3 days had passed since Rodriguez's visit. 3 peaceful days that had fooled her into thinking the worst was over. She should have known better. In her experience, dangerous men like the captain never gave up, they just changed their tactics. "Mrs. Patterson's out there," Elena observed, recognizing the shopwoman's sharp profile in the torchlight. "And Tom Bradley. Half the town, by the look of it. More than half." Marcus moved to another window, his movements careful and quiet. "They've got something planned. This isn't like before, when they were just angry about the children. This feels organized." Elena's stomach twisted with dread. She had seen this kind of mob before, down in New Mexico, when the territorial government decided certain families had too much land and not enough white blood to keep it. Organized hatred was far more dangerous than simple rage. It lasted longer and cut deeper. A voice called out from the darkness, amplified by the cold night air. "Elena Vasquez! We know you're in there with your devil's magic." Elena didn't recognize the speaker, but the words sent ice through her veins. Devil's magic. They still believed she was a witch, despite everything that had happened with Rodriguez. "Come out and face judgment for your crimes," another voice shouted. "Come out, or we'll burn you out like the demon you are." Marcus positioned himself by the door, his rifle ready but pointed at the floor. "They're scared," he said quietly. "Scared people do stupid things." "What are they scared of?" Elena asked, though she dreaded the answer. "More children died yesterday. The Morrison twins and little Jimmy Walsh. The fever's back, and it's worse than before." Elena's heart sank like a stone dropped in deep water. More children, more grief, more reason for the townspeople to need someone to blame. She pressed her forehead against the cool window glass, watching the torches dance in the darkness like devils themselves. "I haven't been near the town in 3 days, she whispered. "How can they blame me for children dying when I'm not even there?" "Because blaming you is easier than accepting that sometimes bad things just happen," Marcus replied. "Because if you're not the cause, then they can't control it by getting rid of you." The truth of his words hit Elena like a physical blow. These people didn't want justice. They wanted the illusion of control over forces they couldn't understand or fight. Disease, death, The randomness of suffering, all of it became manageable if they could pin it on one person and make that person disappear. Elena Vasquez. The voice came again, closer now. We have witnesses, people who saw you sneaking around town at night, casting spells and poisoning wells. Lies, Elena breathed, but her voice shook with fear. Witnesses could be bought or frightened into saying anything. In a territorial court, their word would carry more weight than hers simply because they were white and she was not. Marcus moved to stand beside her at the window, his solid presence offering comfort even in their desperate situation. What do you want to do? Elena studied the mob outside, counting faces and weapons. Some carried torches, others held rifles or shotguns. A few had rope, always rope, as if hanging was the only solution they could imagine. But she also saw uncertainty in some faces, doubt creeping in around the edges of their anger. I want to talk to them, she said finally. Marcus stared at her, as if she'd announced plans to jump into a pit of rattlesnakes. Elena, they'll kill you the moment you step outside. Maybe. But if I stay hidden, they'll burn us both alive and call it justice. She turned from the window to face him fully. I'm tired of running, Marcus. Tired of being afraid. If I'm going to die, let it be while I'm standing up for myself. The admiration in his eyes was mixed with terror, but he nodded slowly. Then we face them together. No. Elena placed her hand on his arm, feeling the solid muscle beneath his shirt. This is my fight. They're here for me, not you. If something goes wrong. Nothing's going wrong, Marcus interrupted firmly. We're both walking away from this alive. That's not a hope, Elena. That's a promise. The conviction in his voice almost made her believe him. But as the shouts outside grew louder and more violent, Elena wondered if either of them would see the sunrise. There's something else, Marcus said quietly. Something I should have told you before. Elena's attention sharpened despite the chaos outside. What? I wrote letters 3 days ago, after Rodriguez left. Letters to the territorial governor, to the federal marshal and Helena, to a newspaper editor in Virginia City. His gray eyes met hers steadily. Letters about corruption and murder and illegal land grabs by certain captains in the territorial guard. Elena stared at him in amazement. While she had been recovering from her ordeal, he had been fighting her battles in ways she never imagined. You did that for me? I did it for justice, but mostly, I did it for you. The simple honesty of his words hit Elena harder than any declaration of love could have. This man, this good, careful, thoughtful man had risked his own safety to protect not just her life but her future. Elena Vasquez. The voice outside turned ugly, threatening. We're done waiting. Come out now, or we come in shooting. Elena took a deep breath, steeling herself for what came next. She had survived Rodriguez's threats and the townspeople's rope. She could survive this too. She had to. But as she reached for the door handle, Marcus caught her wrist gently. Whatever happens out there, he said softly, remember that you're not alone anymore. You've got someone who believes in you. Elena nodded, feeling strength flow into her from his touch. Outside, the mob was growing impatient, their torches casting wild shadows against the cabin walls. But inside, in the warm circle of firelight and Marcus's steady presence, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years. She felt like she belonged somewhere. Let's go show them what we're made of, she said, and opened the door to face her accusers. The night air hit her like a slap, cold and sharp with the promise of winter. The crowd fell silent as she emerged, their torches creating a circle of flickering light around the cabin. Elena stepped into that circle with her head held high, Marcus close behind her with his rifle ready but not raised. I'm here, she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the clearing. What do you want from me? The answer came from multiple voices at once, a chorus of accusations and demands that blended into a roar of hatred. But underneath it all, Elena heard something else, the sound of people who were scared, desperate, and looking for someone to save them from forces they couldn't control. She was about to give them an answer they weren't expecting. You killed the Morrison twins. Mrs. Henderson's voice cracked like breaking glass as she pushed to the front of the mob, her face streaked with tears and fury. They were healthy babies until you put your curse on this town. Elena stood in the circle of torchlight, feeling the heat from the flames but finding no warmth in their glow. The crowd pressed closer, their faces twisted with grief and rage that had been building for weeks. She could smell their fear sharp and sour as spoiled milk. I've been in Marcus's cabin for 3 days, Elena said clearly, pitching her voice to carry to every person in the crowd. How could I curse children I haven't even seen? Witches don't need to see their victims, Tom Bradley shouted, his blacksmith's hammer gleaming in his massive fist. Everyone knows dark magic works from a distance. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. Elena felt her heart sink as she realized how deep their superstitions ran. These weren't educated people who might listen to reason, they were frontier settlers who still believed in old country fears. But then she noticed something that gave her hope. Not everyone in the crowd looked convinced. Dr. Harrison stood near the back, his medical bag clutched in his weathered hands. His face showed doubt rather than certainty. Beside him, several other townspeople shifted uncomfortably, their eyes avoiding Elena's direct gaze. Dr. Harrison, Elena called out, focusing on the one person who might have scientific knowledge. You examined the children who died. What did you find? The doctor stepped forward reluctantly, his white hair catching the torchlight. Fever, mostly. High temperature, difficulty breathing. Same symptoms as before. The same symptoms as what disease? Elena pressed, sensing an opening. Dr. Harrison hesitated, glancing around at the expectant faces surrounding him. Could be influenza. Could be scarlet fever. Hard to say without better equipment. But nothing that suggested supernatural causes? Elena kept her voice calm, reasonable. No signs of poisoning or witchcraft? Now see here. Mayor Caldwell tried to interrupt, but Elena pressed on. Doctor, in your medical opinion, could these deaths have natural causes? The crowd waited in tense silence. Dr. Harrison looked from Elena to the angry faces around him, clearly torn between professional honesty and social pressure. Finally, his shoulders sagged with the weight of truth. Yes, he admitted quietly. The symptoms are consistent with known diseases. The admission hit the crowd like a stone dropped in still water, sending ripples of doubt through their certainty. Elena saw her chance and took it. Then why are you here with torches and rope instead of medicine and care? She asked, her voice growing stronger. If children are dying of disease, shouldn't you be fighting the sickness instead of fighting me? Because you brought the sickness, Mrs. Patterson screeched from somewhere in the crowd. You and your foreign ways and your devil's herbs. My grandmother's herbs, Elena corrected firmly. Plants that grow in these same mountains, used by people who lived here long before any of us arrived. Willow bark for fever, chamomile for sleep, echinacea for strength. The same remedies your own grandmothers might have used back east. She pulled a small leather pouch from her pocket. The same herbs she had offered to help the first sick children. Would you like to know what's really in here? Dried willow bark, honey for taste, and mint for settling stomachs. Nothing more magical than what you'd find in any doctor's bag. Dr. Harrison stepped closer, professional curiosity overcoming social pressure. May I examine those? Elena handed him the pouch without hesitation. The doctor opened it carefully, sniffing the contents and rubbing a small amount between his fingers. His examination was thorough and methodical, the crowd watching in fascination despite themselves. Willow bark, as she said, the doctor announced finally. Honey, mint, and what appears to be dried elderberry. All common remedies with recognized medicinal properties. The crowd stirred uneasily. Their witch was carrying medicine, not poison. Their demon was offering healing, not harm. Elena saw the moment when doubt began to crack their certainty like ice breaking up in spring. But Mayor Caldwell wasn't ready to give up. Tricks, he declared, waving his arms dramatically. She's fooling you all with innocent herbs while the real magic happens elsewhere. What magic? Marcus spoke for the first time, his deep voice cutting through the mayor's bluster. Show us evidence. Real evidence, not fear and superstition. Caldwell pointed an accusing finger at Elena. The children started dying right after she arrived. Children die in frontier towns. Dr. Harrison said quietly, his medical honesty finally overcoming his social caution. Disease spreads fast in small communities. Poor sanitation, contaminated water, exposure to new illnesses. There are dozens of natural explanations. Elena felt the crowd's mood shifting like sand in an hourglass. The solid wall of hatred was developing cracks, letting doubt seep in. She pressed her advantage. I came to Willowbrook looking for work. Nothing more. When children started getting sick, I offered to help because healing is what my family taught me to do. If that makes me a witch, then so does every mother who puts cool cloths on fevered heads or every grandmother who makes soup for the sick. You're Mexican, someone called out from the back of the crowd, as if that explained everything. Yes, I am, Elena replied proudly. My family has lived in this territory longer than most of yours have been in America. We know these mountains, these plants, these remedies because this land has been our home for generations. She gestured toward the peaks that surrounded them, barely visible in the darkness, but felt by everyone present. My grandmother could cure rattlesnake bites and spider poisoning. My mother knew which plants eased childbirth and which ones stopped bleeding. I carry their knowledge not because I made a deal with devils, but because I loved them enough to learn. The words rang across the clearing with the force of absolute truth. Elena saw tears in some eyes now, understanding replacing fear in faces that had looked at her with hatred just minutes before. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, her voice trembling. But my Lucy, she was so healthy before. Children, Dee, Elena said gently, her heart breaking for this grieving mother. Sometimes no matter how much we love them, no matter how hard we try to save them, children die. It's the cruelest truth in the world, but it's still truth. The simple honesty of her words seemed to unlock something in the crowd. Several people began to weep openly, not just for their own losses, but for the guilt they carried, the need to blame someone for tragedies beyond human control. I'm sorry for your loss, Elena continued, addressing Mrs. Henderson directly. I'm sorry for all your losses. I tried to help because I couldn't stand to watch children suffer. But I'm not God, and I'm not the devil. I'm just a woman who knows some old remedies and wanted to do some good. The mob was dissolving before her eyes, anger melting into grief and shame. But Elena knew the transformation wasn't complete yet. People this frightened didn't change their minds easily. Mayor Caldwell must have sensed his control slipping, because he raised his voice in one last desperate attempt to reclaim the crowd's fury. Don't let her fool you with pretty words. She's still a Mexican witch who brought death to our children. But his words fell flat now, echoing empty in the darkness. The crowd had heard truth spoken with courage and compassion. They had seen Elena stand before them without weapons or threats, offering only honesty and understanding. Dr. Harrison spoke into the silence that followed. I move that we return to town and focus on treating the children who are still sick instead of persecuting the woman who tried to help them. One by one, people began to nod. Torches lowered as hands grew tired of holding them high in accusation. The circle of firelight that had seemed like a noose around Elena's neck began to feel like something else, entirely a warm hearth where truth could finally be spoken and heard. But Elena knew their work wasn't finished yet. Rodriguez was still out there, still scheming. The silver mine still represented a threat to her freedom and her life. And the bonds forming between her and Marcus still needed time to grow strong enough to weather whatever storms lay ahead. As the crowd began to disperse, mumbling apologies and awkward goodbyes, Elena felt Marcus's hand find hers in the darkness. His fingers were warm and steady, anchoring her to this moment of unexpected victory. They had won this battle with words instead of weapons, with truth instead of force. But Elena knew that the hardest tests still lay ahead. 2 weeks passed like pages turning in a peaceful book before Elena discovered the letter that would change everything. She found it tucked under a loose stone near Marcus's woodpile, the paper damp with morning dew but still readable in the dawnlight. Her hands trembled as she recognized the elegant handwriting that had once signed her father's death warrant. My dear Elena, the letter began in Rodriguez's smooth script. I trust you are enjoying your temporary victory with the simple folk of Willowbrook. How gratifying it must be to have their acceptance after so much fear and suspicion. But I'm afraid your celebration is premature. Elena's stomach clenched as she read on, Marcus emerging from the cabin with 2 steaming cups of coffee just as she reached the letter's cruel heart. You see, I've discovered something interesting about your protector, the noble lumberjack who rescued you so dramatically. Did you know that Marcus Jameson owes the Territorial Bank nearly $3,000? A debt secured against his property, this very land where you found sanctuary? A debt that comes due in exactly 1 week. The coffee cup slipped from Elena's numb fingers, shattering against the stone steps like her hopes. Marcus rushed to her side, concern written across his weathered features as she handed him the letter with shaking hands. His face went pale as mountain snow as he read Rodriguez's words. "Elena, I can explain. $3,000? Her voice came out as a whisper. "Marcus, that's more money than most people see in 5 years." He sank onto the steps beside her, the letter crumpling in his large hands. "My brother needed surgery back in San Francisco. Emergency operation after a logging accident. I mortgaged everything to pay the doctors." Elena felt the world tilting beneath her feet. All this time, she had thought Marcus's cabin was a sanctuary, a permanent refuge where they could build something together. Instead, it was borrowed time, as fragile as the morning mist that clung to the mountains. "The bank will take the property," Marcus continued, his voice hollow with defeat. "I've been trying to earn enough to pay it back, but lumber prices dropped this fall. I'm short, nearly $1,000. Rodriguez's letter contained more poison, each word precisely calculated to destroy their peace. "I'm prepared to offer you a trade, Elena. Sign over your rights to the Vasquez silver mine, and I'll ensure Mr. Jameson's debt disappears. Refuse, and you'll both be homeless before the first snow. Choose wisely." Elena stared at the letter, feeling the weight of impossible choices settling on her shoulders like a yoke. Her father's mine, the last piece of her family's legacy, the one thing Rodriguez had been trying to steal for years in exchange for Marcus's home and livelihood. "We'll find another way," Marcus said firmly, but Elena could hear the desperation beneath his determination. "I'll sell everything, work extra shifts at the mill." "In 1 week?" Elena shook her head. "Even if you could earn that much money so quickly, Rodriguez would just find another way to hurt us. He won't stop until he gets what he wants." She stood and walked to the edge of the clearing, looking out at the forest that had become her home. Golden leaves drifted down like tears, reminding her that winter was coming whether they were ready or not. Behind her, she could hear Marcus pacing, his boots wearing a path in the fallen leaves. "There's something else you should know," he said quietly, "about why I really mortgaged the land." Elena turned, seeing something in his expression that made her heart skip. "What do you mean?" "My brother Tom. He wasn't hurt in a logging accident." Marcus's voice carried the weight of old shame. "He was shot during a bank robbery in Sacramento. Shot by territorial guards while trying to steal money for medicine for his sick daughter." The confession hit Elena like a physical blow. Marcus's family carried secrets as dark as her own desperation that led to desperate choices, love that demanded impossible sacrifices. "Tom died in prison," Marcus continued. "But not before I promised to take care of his daughter, my niece Sarah. The $3,000, it wasn't for surgery. It was for bribes, lawyers, doctors who might have kept him alive long enough to see his child grow up." Elena felt tears stinging her eyes. All this time, Marcus had been carrying the burden of his brother's choices, trying to honor a promise to a dying man, just as she carried the weight of her father's dreams and her grandmother's knowledge. "Where is Sarah now?" Elena asked softly. "With my sister in Oregon Territory. Safe, healthy, loved. But every month I send what I can to help support her." Marcus looked up at Elena with eyes full of old pain. "That's why I could never catch up on the debt. Every dollar I earned went to keeping my promise." Elena understood now why Marcus had saved her that day by the cottonwood tree. He knew what it meant to be trapped by circumstances beyond your control, to need someone to believe in your worth when the world seemed determined to crush you. Rodriguez counted on this, she realized aloud. He's been watching us, learning our weaknesses. He knows exactly how to hurt us most. So, what do we do? Elena looked at the letter again, seeing Rodriguez's elegant trap laid out in black ink. Give up her family's legacy, or watch Marcus lose everything he had worked to build. Accept defeat, or fight a battle they couldn't win. But as she stared at those cruel words, another possibility began to take shape in her mind. Dangerous, desperate, but perhaps their only chance. "We don't run, and we don't surrender," she said slowly. "We turn his own weapons against him." Marcus looked at her with growing alarm. "Elena, what are you thinking?" She turned to face him fully, seeing her own determination reflected in his worried gaze. "I'm thinking it's time to stop playing defense. Rodriguez wants a fight? Let's give him one he'll never forget." The plan forming in her mind was risky beyond measure. But sometimes, Elena thought, the only way to escape a trap was to spring it yourself and hope you were quick enough to avoid the consequences. Outside the forest, a hawk cried in the distance, its call echoing off the mountains like a war cry. Elena listened to that wild sound and felt something fierce awakening in her own heart. Rodriguez thought he had them cornered. But cornered animals, Elena remembered, were often the most dangerous of all. "You want to rob the territorial bank?" Marcus stared at Elena, as if she had announced plans to steal the moon from the sky. "Elena, that's exactly what got my brother killed." Elena paced the length of the cabin, her mind racing through possibilities and dangers. Outside, November wind rattled the windows with the promise of coming winter, but inside, the fire burned bright with desperate hope. "Not rob," she corrected carefully. "Expose. Rodriguez has been using his position to steal land and silence witnesses for years. If we can prove it." "With what evidence?" Marcus stood from his chair, following her restless movement with worried eyes. "His word against ours won't hold up in any territorial court." Elena pulled a small key from around her neck, its brass surface worn smooth by years of handling. "This opens a safety deposit box in the bank vault. My father's box, where he kept copies of all his business dealings with Rodriguez. She had carried that key since her father's death, too afraid to use it but too loyal to throw it away. Now it represented their only chance to fight back with something stronger than words or weapons. "Documents proving Rodriguez murdered your father," Marcus said slowly, understanding dawning in his gray eyes. "Evidence of bribery, illegal land transfers, everything we need to destroy him." Elena's voice carried fierce satisfaction. "But we have to get into that vault before Rodriguez realizes what we're planning." They spent the next 3 days preparing with the careful precision of generals planning a siege. Marcus used his connections at the lumber mill to learn the bank's schedule, when the guards changed shifts, when the vault was open for business, when the fewest people would be around to ask questions. Elena studied the building itself, noting every entrance and exit, every window and weak point. The Willowbrook Bank was a solid stone structure, built to withstand both robberies and weather. But Elena wasn't planning to break in. She was planning to walk through the front door with her father's key and the legal right to access his property. "The timing has to be perfect," Marcus said on the morning they had chosen. "Rodriguez expects an answer to his ultimatum today. If we're going to move, it has to be now." Elena nodded, checking her appearance in Marcus's small mirror. She had dressed carefully, her best dress, her grandmother's silver jewelry, her hair pinned up in a style that suggested respectability rather than desperation. She needed to look like a legitimate customer, not a woman planning to steal evidence from a corrupt captain. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus asked one final time. "Once we start down this path, there's no going back." Elena thought of her father, crushed beneath tons of rock because Rodriguez wanted his silver. She thought of the children who had died while she was blamed for diseases she couldn't prevent. She thought of Marcus's brother, shot down like a dog for trying to save his daughter. "I've been running from Rodriguez's corruption my whole life," she said firmly. "Today it stops." They walked into town separately, Elena taking the main road while Marcus circled around to position himself near the bank's back entrance. The morning was crisp and clear, frost glittering on the boardwalks like scattered diamonds. A few townspeople nodded to Elena as she passed. Mrs. Henderson offered a shy smile. Dr. Harrison tipped his hat respectfully. The change in their attitudes still amazed her. 2 weeks ago, these same people had wanted to hang her from the cottonwood tree. Now they saw her as she truly was a woman trying to heal rather than harm, to build rather than destroy. But all their newfound acceptance would mean nothing if Rodriguez succeeded in driving her from the territory. The bank's interior was dimly lit and smelled of ink and old paper. Behind the polished counter, Mr. Franklin the banker looked up from his ledgers with professional courtesy. "Miss Vasquez," he said formally, "how may I assist you today?" Elena placed her father's key on the counter between them, its brass surface catching the lamplight. "I need to access my father's safety deposit box." Franklin's eyebrows rose slightly. "I'll need to verify your identity and your right to access the contents." Elena produced the documents she had prepared: her father's death certificate, papers proving her inheritance, identification establishing her as Elena Vasquez. Franklin examined each document carefully, comparing signatures and checking seals with professional thoroughness. "Everything appears to be in order," he said finally. "If you'll follow me to the vault." The vault door was massive, its steel surface unmarked by time or weather. Franklin worked the combination with practiced ease, the heavy door swinging open to reveal rows of metal boxes lining the walls like sleeping secrets. Box 47 was smaller than Elena had expected, but when Franklin's key joined with hers to open it, the contents made her heart race with vindication. Papers, letters, photographs, years of evidence documenting Rodriguez's crimes in her father's careful handwriting. "I'll need some time to review the contents," Elena told Franklin, keeping her voice steady despite the excitement building in her chest. "Of course, you may use the private room adjacent to the vault. Take all the time you need." Elena carried the box to the small room Franklin indicated, her hands trembling slightly as she began to examine her father's legacy. Letter after letter detailed Rodriguez's corruption, bribes paid to territorial officials, threats made against honest businessmen, illegal seizures of property from families deemed undesirable. But the most damning evidence was a series of photographs showing Rodriguez meeting with known criminals, passing money and documents in exchange for services that could only be called murder for hire. Elena recognized some of the faces, men who had died in accidents after refusing to sell their land to territorial interests. Her father had been documenting Rodriguez's crimes for years, building a case that would have destroyed the corrupt captain's career and sent him to prison. But he had died before he could present his evidence, leaving Elena to carry on his fight for justice. As she organized the papers, Elena heard voices outside the private room, male voices, angry and urgent. Her blood turned to ice as she recognized one of them. Rodriguez had found her. "Where is she, Franklin?" The captain's voice carried clearly through the thin walls. "I know Elena Vasquez is here. I saw her enter your establishment." "I'm afraid I cannot discuss our customer's private business," Franklin replied stiffly. "Bank policy strictly forbids." "Bank policy?" Rodriguez laughed coldly. "I think you'll find that territorial law supersedes your precious policies. I have a warrant for that woman's arrest." Elena's mind raced as she heard footsteps approaching her hiding place. She had the evidence she needed to destroy Rodriguez, but she had to survive long enough to use it. Through the small window of the private room, she could see Marcus positioning himself near the bank's rear exit, ready to provide cover if she needed to run. The door to the private room burst open, and Rodriguez stood framed in the doorway like an avenging angel dressed in territorial uniform. His eyes fell on the scattered papers covering the small table, and his face went white with recognition and rage. "Looking for something that belongs to you?" Elena asked calmly, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Rodriguez stepped into the room, his hand resting on his pistol grip. "Those documents are territorial property, evidence in an ongoing investigation." "Investigation into what?" Elena challenged. "Your own crimes?" For a moment, they faced each other across the small room like gunslingers at dawn. Rodriguez's eyes were cold as winter ice, but Elena saw something else there too: fear. The fear of a man whose carefully constructed web of corruption was finally unraveling. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," Rodriguez said quietly. "There are forces at work here bigger than your petty quest for revenge." "Justice," Elena corrected. "Not revenge. Justice." Rodriguez smiled, but the expression held no warmth. "Justice is whatever the territorial government says it is, and I am the territorial government in this region." Elena gathered the most damning documents into a neat pile, her movements deliberate and calm despite the danger. Not anymore. She stood and walked toward the door, documents clutched in her hands like weapons. Rodriguez blocked her path, his bulk filling the narrow doorway. "Those papers never leave this room," he said flatly. "They already have," Elena replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. Rodriguez's confusion lasted only a moment before understanding dawned in his eyes. While Elena had been organizing evidence in the private room, Marcus had been copying the most important documents and smuggling them out through the bank's rear entrance. By now, those copies were on their way to the territorial governor, the federal marshal, and every newspaper editor within 100 miles. "You clever little witch," Rodriguez breathed, admiration and hatred warring in his voice. "Not a witch," Elena said firmly. "Just a woman who refuses to be afraid anymore." She pushed past him into the main banking area, where Franklin and several customers watched with growing alarm. Rodriguez followed close behind, his hand still hovering near his weapon. "Citizens of Willowbrook," Elena called out, her voice carrying clearly through the stone building. "I want you to witness what territorial justice looks like when it serves corruption instead of law." She held up the documents for everyone to see. "These papers prove that Captain Rodriguez has been murdering honest businessmen and stealing their property for years, including my father, crushed to death in a mine shaft because he refused to sell our family's legacy." The bank customers stared in shocked silence. Franklin's face had gone pale as parchment. Even Rodriguez seemed momentarily stunned by Elena's public accusation. But Elena wasn't finished. She had spent too many years running and hiding to waste this moment of truth. "This man tried to hang me for witchcraft to cover up his own crimes," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "He threatened to destroy Marcus Jameson's home and livelihood to force me into silence. He has turned this territory into his personal kingdom, ruling through fear and murder." Rodriguez's control finally snapped. His pistol cleared its holster with deadly speed. But Elena was already moving, diving behind the banking counter as the gunshot echoed through the stone building like thunder. The bullet splintered wood inches from her head, sending splinters flying like angry wasps. Screams echoed from the bank customers as they scrambled for cover. But Elena clutched her father's documents tight against her chest, knowing that truth was a more powerful weapon than any gun. Outside, she could hear Marcus's voice shouting her name. Inside, Rodriguez was reloading for another shot. But Elena felt no fear. Only a fierce satisfaction that justice was finally within reach. Rodriguez had revealed his true nature in front of witnesses. Whatever happened next, the truth was free. And truth, Elena had learned, was the one thing that corrupt men could never kill. "It's over, Rodriguez," she called out from behind the counter. "The whole territory will know what you are by sunset." His answer was another gunshot that shattered the window above her head. But Elena was already moving again, racing toward the bank's front door and the freedom that waited beyond. Behind her, Rodriguez roared with frustrated rage. But she didn't look back. She had spent too many years looking over her shoulder, fearing the shadows of the past. Now she was running toward the light.